Hello, it's Matt Linklater here, and welcome back. Let's get back into the flexibility of thought. When you have the flexibility of thought, and you can go from the details to the big picture, you can go laterally, you're going to control any communication. And you're going to be able to control the communication and get the outcomes that you ultimately want. So if you can have the ability to take somebody from the big picture down to the specifics, from the specifics back up to the big picture, and then think them laterally, you're going to have more success. And so let's think about this. So eventually you got to get people to think about their problems and goals no matter what they're doing. So then when you have them kind of in the state of their problems and goals, you actually chunk them down to the product and how the product's going to help them overcome those problems and accomplish those goals. Now, if you start hitting a mental block, that's where the lateral thought and lateral thinking comes in of reframing your client and telling stories. It helps them overcome that mental block. And so let me share with you a very simple idea or a great story or great analogy around this, right? So MIT was looking at third world countries, and what they were identifying is why do third world countries have high infant mortality rates? And what they found is that they couldn't keep babies warm, so they didn't have incubators. So what they did is they raised money and bought all these third world countries incubators for these babies. But what happened was these incubators then quickly were breaking down. Here's the thing: in third world countries, they don't have spare parts for incubators, so all this fundraising and getting them incubators was for nothing, because when they broke down, the infant mortality rates were still there. So what they did is they had a lateral thought. They said, what else do these third world countries do well? And what do they do well mechanically is they're driving cars from the 50s and 60s. I mean, if you look at Cuba now, it's just opened up, right, for America, is that they're driving around cars from the 50s and the 60s. And so you can see here what they did is they made an incubator made of car parts. You can see a filter there. You can see some different wires looking from the car. You have two headlights for warmers there. And so they had a lateral thought. So when you think about thinking out of the box or coming up with solutions and coming up with solutions to your problems, really it's flexibility of thought. Your ability to chunk up out of the problem or chunk laterally and see other solutions. And that's really what thinking out of the box is your ability to think inductively rather than deductively. And thinking inductively and persuading others inductively is being able to go from the big picture down to the specifics, and the specifics up to the big picture and laterally. So story selling. Why do you use stories? Stories are going to help you overcome objections. We have a objection handling training called the wheelbarrow method, and the wheelbarrow method, in theory, we teach you about 5-6 different strategies to overcome objections, how to pre-frame objections, and how to overcome objections within each communication. But really, when you think about overcoming objections and telling stories, is that people's objections are chunked down into the specifics, and so to overcome an objection, you got to chunk them back up to the big pictures, to the problems and goals, and then chunk them down somewhere else, in the details to fill them with value. So a little bit beyond what we're talking about here, but if you can think about it heuristically, and from a mental picture, is that to overcome objections, you really got to chunk up to the big picture, back to the problems and goals, and then chunk laterally somewhere else to overcome that objection. You can learn something new or difficult. So really, stories make the unknown familiar. And so when you use an analogy of something that would be unknown to make it familiar in your mind, you're learning something new or difficult, right? Sports analogies. This is like this in sports. We hear this all the time in business. And what everyone's trying to do is take something esoteric, take something new, and combine it with a metaphor of sports to make it familiar. And so we can learn something new or difficult by telling a story. And so when you're persuading somebody or bringing up a product that maybe they may not be familiar with, by telling a story of something that's similar to them or similar in their mindset, you can help them learn something new. You can install a belief. Stories are great to install a belief. Why this is true is because all beliefs are stored unconsciously. And so what we usually suspend our disbelief on and what things we allow to bypass our critical faculty barrier are things that already support our current beliefs. But if you can do it with volition and get people to open up their critical faculty, suspend their disbelief. You could start installing new beliefs by bypassing their critical faculty with communication strategies you're using with volition. And so if you can get somebody to bypass their critical faculty barrier, you could speak to their unconscious mind and help them either install a new belief or destroy an old disempowering belief. Remember why I say disempowering. All this has to be used for the utmost ethics, not necessarily what we see on TV. I'm not saying that the news is used ethically or not. That's up to them. But I don't know if they have our best interest in mind. The next one is you want to connect emotionally with people. If you can tell a story, the thing about telling a story is people can't say yes, people can't say no. You bypass the critical faculty barrier, so you're going to hit their limbic brain. You bypass that neocortex. You're going to be able to tell emotionally evoking stories. You know, a lot of stuff that I use in my presentations are videos, stories, pictures, and all that is to connect emotionally and try to hit that limbic brain and be a hot cognition, if you will. Stories create hot cognitions. Every story is going to create a hot cognition. Each one of those pictures that I've showed already in this training are visuals, right? They're hot cognitions attaching to that limbic brain. When I tell a story, it's connecting to that limbic brain. Everything I try to say is to fuel dopamine and norepinephrine, things that I'm helping you. Everything I frame up are things that you could have, and then things that you may be missing out on if you don't utilize this, or if you don't utilize this, things that you might lose. So everything I have is to create hot cognitions. And when you think about hot cognitions, is everything you say needs to just be framed up around the problems and goals of the client. So don't get caught up on the hot cognition, because you might be watching this, Matt, I don't understand what hot cognitions are. Well, I can't, promise you a half-hour video, and I'm probably going to give you about 2 hours here, but I can't give you, the hot cognitions. This would be another hour video. Set frames. So in any communication strategy, there are two frames coming together. So I trained somebody in the corporate world called wholesalers. Wholesalers make a few $100,000 a year. So when they come to my trainings, they come with a frame of mind, and I have a frame of mind. Now let's look at their frame. Their frame is, I have to be pulled out of my territory. I have to be away from my family. Somebody else is telling me to go. Somebody else is paying for me. They're telling me that this is going to be good for me. I may or may not believe them. I may or may not like them. So I'm going to go here. I am spending time, so I'm partially open to it. However, this better be good because I'm wasting my time. So they have a 50-50 belief system when they come into my trainings. So my frame is, hey, I want to influence them. My frame is I want to help them. I want to make them better. And I want to make the 2 days that I'm with them the most enjoyable. So how do I set frames? Well, everything I do in the first hour and a half of my training is specifically designed to collapse their frame and bring them into my frame. What do? I tell an opening joke. I tell a story that, hey, no matter what level of success you're at, there's always another level of success. I tell them the Jack Nicklaus story, all about how do you think bigger. No matter how big you're thinking, there's always another level that you could think to how big you're thinking. I tell them a couple jokes. I throw up a couple things that are significant about me. In the financial world, I've raised over $1 billion. I work with people each and every day, so I tell a few things that are successful about me. I teach them perception and projection. I teach them I probably set, if you counted how many frames, I probably set about 10 different frames up just in the first hour and a half of all my trainings. And the whole thing is, I want to set a frame of power, authority, strength, status, and knowledge. I want them to believe that I can take them to another level. And so by doing this, I tell a bunch of different stories and a bunch of different strategies. And we'll talk a little bit of how I do that in a minute. So really, as we talked about in the earlier video of setting up frames, here is the ladder of abstraction of specificity. So you can see my sales model is really built somewhere around, how do you communicate to the big picture, the details, and think laterally. And all this comes from a communication strategy I learned in neurolinguistic programming called the hierarchy of ideas. Now, I don't want to make it too complicated because when you get there, it's way too chunked down. So I took this model and brought it to communication so you can have ways of communicating. So for instance, I'm going to share with you a matrix in this training in one of these videos here. a 4-box matrix of why, what, how, what, if. And the guy I trained just earlier this week goes, you know what? I've seen the strategy before. Everyone tells about how to start with why, and they put us through all these questionnaires and everything. And at the end of the week, I still didn't know how to craft my message around the why. And I showed him in my training, and he's like, finally, this is the best methodology I've ever seen. How do I get this to the rest of my team? And the reason is because sometimes we chunk way down in the wrong places, but how do you frame things up in such a way that you can bring it to life for people? And that's what the ladder of abstraction and specificity does. That's what my sales model does, is basically gives you the idea and the heuristic in your mind that if somebody's down in the details, you got to chunk them up to the big picture. If somebody's down in the details giving you an objection, you got to get back to their problems and goals. It's that simple. But when somebody's chunked down in the details, what do? We sell harder, we explain our product better, but that's not what we need to do. We need to get back to their problems and goals. So let's talk about what is behind this. And let me give you a little bit more of the what, if you will. So if you looked at a hierarchy of ideas here, and let's say in the middle there you got sundials, phones, watches, clocks, and computers. So if you were selling sundials, phones, watches, clocks, and computers, now if you were selling time devices, rather, you can sell all these. You can sell time with sundials, phones, watches, clocks, computers. Now if you were selling just say watches, you can chunk down into the brands. So you can go Rolex, Cartier, you can go Roadster, Tank. You can chunk down into the parts and go hairsprings, jewels, bracelets, gold, silver. So if you're selling all this, you can chunk way down. But at the end of the day, these are all just time devices. They solve a problem for people and set up a goal of the ability to tell time, and gets rid of the ability of, or the fear of being late. But what I'm saying here is that you can actually chunk down or chunk up on any one of your products. But it doesn't really matter of the product, because at the end, all you have to do is you really got to be satisfying their goals and problems. So yes, we do want a great product. Some of us want expensive watches. Some of us want to know the details of the watches. But what is the problem and the goal? And so when you look around their time devices there, what's the problem and goal of the time devices? You know, I have a buddy who has a $10,000 watch. I wear an $80 watch. And so each one of us have a different problem and a different goal. And so you can see there that no matter how you're telling time, you can chunk down or you can bring it back to the time devices. And so at the big picture there, you have existence, time devices. But when you get down to the product and the specifics and the details, you can see you chunk down. And so you have to identify in the communication is what's the right amount of chunk level you need in your communication to have success. Do you need to go all the way down into all the details, or can you stick around the top of time devices and existence, if you will? And so really when you have this as a communication heuristic and you ask yourself, do I need to get back to the big picture, or do I need to get more specific? And so you really have to say, is the conversation going where I want to go? And where do I need to take it? So let's just look at this. So if you want to chunk up, you got to ask yourself these questions. These are mental questions that you ask yourself. And at first, it's cumbersome. So when you're asking yourself these questions, you're going to say, Matt, is this really worth it? Well, the better you become at this, the more you do this outside of your conscious awareness. And so, for instance, if somebody's chunked down, you just say, for what purpose, or what is your intention? So let me give you an example. Somebody comes in and says, Matt, I don't like one of your products. And the average salesperson would have went back in and sold that product harder. But I said, you know, for what intention or for what purpose is this product? And this product was for the sole intention and purpose of solving his goals. There's the sole intention and purpose of getting him to be able to retire in 6 years. This was in my financial company. So really I chunked back to the big picture, and we started around, okay, well, you know, for what purpose was this product and for what intention? And then we framed the conversation around his problems and goals rather than trying to dig deeper back into the product. So then when we have the intention and purpose outlined, we can go back down and say, well, what specifically solves this problem? What specifically, what specifically are we using? and then we get back into the product and the details. So anywhere you go, if somebody's too chunked down, you chunk them back up. If somebody's chunked up, you can chunk them back down. And in any sales, you want to set up the communication around the intention, the purpose, and then once you have that well established, you chunk them down into the product and the details. If they get lost in the details, you chunk them back up to the purpose and the intention. And so simply by chunking up, you say for what purpose, what is the intention, what is this an example of? And if you want to chunk somebody down into the details, you say for what, whom specifically, and what are the specific examples of this. So what I want to do is share with you really how lateral thinking also works here. And so how lateral thinking is you ask yourself, what is this an example of? So when you look at the incubators from the MIT story I told earlier, you say, what is this an example of? Well, this is an example of something mechanical. This is something, example of something that's engineered. Well, ask what are other examples of this? What are other examples that third world countries do well that are engineered or mechanical things? Well, they do cars. That's the lateral chunk. So the lateral chunk would be that their ability to manufacture cars, or not even just manufacture cars, but their ability to use cars for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And so it's really, that is where you come from. And all lateral thinking, and all comedians use lateral thinking. So I went and saw Carrot Top at the Luxor in Las Vegas. And so we're at the Luxor. He's telling jokes about the Luxor. He's telling jokes about how in his hotel room that the walls are slanted. And so he's telling funny stories about how the housekeeper comes in and she's trying to vacuum, or he's trying to vacuum and get to the corner of the room, and as they're trying to get to the corner of the room, they're boom, hitting their head on the wall because of the slanted wall. And then he said just to maximize his space in there, he had special suitcase and luggage made for his closets. Now he's a prop guy, but really you can see that's just a lateral thought from the Luxor. And so an easy exercise to do for this. So if you have a team, if you're a sales manager listening to this video, or if you just have some other salespeople, sales professionals you work with, or even in your household, really the ability to chunk from the big picture down into the specifics works in the household because it helps you chunk out of the state of overwhelm. If you're overwhelmed, you're stuck down in the details. So if you just learn the methodology of chunking up and chunking down, you'll have more success mentally in communicating with yourself. But here, very simply, is you need 3 people. So you have 2 chairs facing each other. One is A, one is B. And then you have somebody standing behind B. And so A is going to pick a topic and start talking. C is going to tell them to get specific on the topic, get more big picture on the topic, or to speak laterally on the topic. And then what's going to happen is B is going to try to guess, are you chunking laterally, are you chunking up, or are you chunking down? So again, A is the one talking, picking a topic. Person standing behind B, C, is telling you to chunk down, chunk up, or chunk laterally, and B is guessing which way are you going with your communication. So, and then rotate, right? Do it 3 times so everybody gets a chance to try this exercise. I really believe your ability to think most flexible, the person who can speak the most flexible, or is the most flexible in their communication, is ultimately the one that is going to control every communication that they have. And I think this is a heuristic model to use, is that anytime that you can have the flexibility to think inductively and deductively and laterally, you're going to have more success. And so the more you practice this, the more successful you're going to be. So what I would suggest is this: if you don't have 3 people to practice with, what I would suggest is that go out there and see in every one of your conversations for the next 3 days is if you could chunk everybody up. And then 3 days after that, chunk everybody down. and then for 3 days after that, chunk everybody laterally, and you'll start building this flexibility of communication. So go out there, either practice with somebody or practice with yourself in your mind and each one of the people and situations that you are communicating for the next 3, 6, and 9 days. 3 days chunking up, 3 days chunking down, and 3 days chunking laterally.